Hey everyone, it's Lori, and it's been a long time. Hey everyone, it's Lori, and it's been a long time since I recorded a video. In fact, I did not do my May reading up. In fact, I did not do my May reading wrap up. So I'm going to do a combined May and June reading wrap up, which means I will be talking about 19 books. So, sorry, this might get a little long, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the books I read in May. I only read 4 books in May, and that's probably why I never got around to filming a reading wrap up. And then, I read 15 more in June, and yeah, now I regret that life choice, but that's okay. So of those books, 3 were audiobooks and 1 was a physical book. So the audiobooks were the Great Plains Trilogy by Willa Cather. So the first one is O Pioneers, which is one that I assigned my girls to read for American literature this year. So I figured I should read it too, since I hadn't. And then the next one is The Song of the Lark, and the final one is My Antonia. I enjoyed all of the books in this series. Willa Cather has a very kind of poetic way of writing, and I've always really enjoyed her writing. So these were very good books. I will say of the 3, I think O Pioneers was my favorite, and Song of the Lark was my least favorite, which is a little bit sad because Song of the Lark is the only one of those 3 books that's set in Colorado. The others are set in Nebraska, as I point towards Nebraska. So since we are in Colorado but close to Nebraska, these seem very these are kind of close to home in a lot of ways, and because my husband's ancestry is German and Bohemian, and in all of these books they feature Bohemian families and sometimes communities as well. So kind of taking a look into the past of my husband's family, since we still farm. They farmed a couple generations ago too. It's kind of an interesting thing to look at. So O Pioneers is about Alexandra, and she was my favorite of the protagonists. And then the second book, Song of the Lark, was about Taya, and she was a musician. So in a lot of ways, I thought I would like that one the best, but I just kind of found her a little bit on the irritating side. And then My Antonia, of course, is about Antonia. It's actually told by a young man that kind of grew up with her, but, it's all about Antonia. So those are really interesting books set in a particularly interesting time period and place for me. So I really enjoyed reading those. While I was reading those, my husband found out about a Norwegian kind of version of, the like O Pioneers type of story. I do not remember the author, but it's called Giants of the Earth, I think, and he is reading that now. So at some point, I think he'll probably talk me into reading that one as well. The other book that I read in the month of May was The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate. This is one that I put on my list for the Modern Mrs. Darcy Challenge. I'm guessing this was my Newbery Award-winning book, because I think that was one of the prompts I chose. But anyway, this was a very good book. I'm sad it took so long for me to actually read it. I don't know. I think there's like a movie or something, and I don't know that I would watch it. We'll have to see. Maybe the girls will make me sometime. But yeah, Ivan's a sweet gorilla. So I kind of really enjoyed the story. And he's an artist, and since I have so many artists in my house, I appreciated a gorilla artist. Next up, we have my June books. So as I said earlier, I read 15 books in the month of June. As I said, I read 15 books in the month of June. And of those books, I listened to 4 audiobooks, I read 3 physical books, and I read 8 ebooks. I'm going through a little bit of a ebook thing again right now. So I'm going to start with my nonfiction and then get into my fiction and classics and that sort of thing. So the So the audiobook that I listened to that was nonfiction this month was called Eager by Ben Goldfarb, and it's a book about beavers. I kind of enjoy natural history type books from time to time, and so when there was some sort of Audible sale, I saw this and it caught my eye, and I knew nothing about it, but I thought it would be fun, and it was. You say maybe about an 11-hour book, so not hugely long, but each chapter is a bit long. Each one was about an hour long, which worked out well because I spent a lot of time sitting in the car waiting for the kids at swim practice this summer, because that's what I do in June most years. So it's kind of about how beavers being removed from our ecosystems has made our rivers look different, and what that has done to wildlife, and how perhaps reintroducing beavers into areas is a good way to deal with some of the problems we have. Very interesting, including like beavers interacting with cattle, so how the cattle industry has kind of gotten rid of beavers and found them to be a nuisance, but some cases where ranchers embraced the beavers and made it so the cows couldn't overgraze along the banks of the river and so forth, so that the beavers could have their habitat, and they actually were able to store a lot more water, because the beavers basically store water with their damming of rivers. So that helped these ranchers during a drought, in that they didn't have to truck water in to their cattle. So that was very interesting to me, since I'm surrounded by cows. We don't have any rivers here, though, so there's nothing for beavers to dam in our county. I don't believe we have any surface water, so yay for aquifers. But also the recharging of aquifers was in there too, so that was interesting as well. And then two of the physical books I read were nonfiction as well. One I have been working on for quite a long time, and that's College Admission from Application to Acceptance Step by Step, because Eva is going to be a senior. So this is by Robin Mamlet and Christine Van Velde. And I found this to be overall pretty helpful. Obviously, we have a little bit of a unique circumstance, which is that we homeschool, and there is a couple of pages about how to deal with homeschooling in here, but really honestly I could use a homeschooler's guide to college admission, because that would be more useful to me, although this did help me calm down quite a bit on a lot of things. Although I will admit that this and a lot of other sources kind of led me the wrong direction in what we should look at in colleges, because everybody kept saying don't look at the cost so much, they have good financial aid, and I'm finding that to not be as true as people thought it was, because they have good financial aid for people in our income range with, typical assets, and we have higher than typical assets because we farm, and so there's farm ground that is worth money but can't pay tuition. So anyway, that's been stressful for me, but this was overall a pretty good book, and if you are just a normal parent trying to get your kid through the college admission process, this would probably be plenty sufficient for what you need. And then my other nonfiction book was Preventable by Andy Slavitt. My husband and I have listened to Andy Slavitt's podcast In the Bubble for a majority of the pandemic, and even now he has a 10-part series going on now that he is back to the podcast after working with the government to get vaccine rollout going. So I'm thankful for that. But this is basically kind of an insider's view of what happened during the pandemic and what could have been done better, what was ignored. And Andy Slavitt is like a Democrat kind of guy. I mean, he's been in government before, so he has a lot of contacts, and he talked to a lot of people, and he helped a lot of people trying to get things going, talked to many of the governors to help them figure things out, and he was involved in the rollout of Obamacare when they were having a lot of problems at first. So it's very interesting. I would recommend this if you can handle it. It'll make you really angry because, there's a lot of incompetence that led to a lot of deaths that didn't need to happen. But It's well written. It's not written so technically that it's difficult to understand. It's like having a conversation. It's almost like his podcast in a lot of ways, only, of course, expanded. And he tells quite a few people's stories of how the pandemic kind of affected them, from people who were involved in trying to do pandemic response to, essential workers. Like he has a family where the father was an Amazon warehouse worker during the pandemic, and he got sick at work, but it was at the point where he couldn't get tested, and he couldn't get any extra sick leave without a test, but he couldn't get a test. And the complications of, what essential workers went through, particularly early on in the pandemic when it was hard to get tested and nothing was really being done. So it'll make you angry, but really well written, really well researched. I appreciated this a lot. Okay, so one of the reasons why I finished 15 books in the month of June is I spent a lot of time at different locations waiting on the kids, and one of those is they took the ACT, Eva for the second time, Charlotte for the first time, and we had to go into Nebraska, about an hour and a half away. So I had multiple hours to kill while they were taking a test, so I think I finished like 4 books that day. But we went and stayed the night before, and to try to get us calmed down and ready to face the day, I downloaded one of my favorite audiobooks of all time for us to listen to. It's very short. It's Fortunately the Milk by Neil Gaiman, read by Neil Gaiman. And it's just amazing. It's a hilarious story of a father and some children are home alone. The mom had to go somewhere, and she gives a list of reminders to the dad, and one of them was, don't forget to get the milk, and he forgot to get the milk. So they're trying to have their breakfast, and they have no milk, so they can't have cereal. And then the dad figures out he can't have tea without milk, so he goes to the corner shop, and then he's gone for a very long time. And then he comes back and tells the kids the story of what happened, which you've got like dinosaurs and time travel and pirates and aliens and you just name it. It's hilarious. So if you want a good family-friendly audiobook that's like an hour-ish long, highly recommend Fortunately the Milk. Another book I finished while the kids were taking their ACT test was No One Noticed the Cat by Anne McCaffrey. So I think I picked this up at a library book sale. Yes, it does have the library's name in the front. Just because I really enjoy Anne McCaffrey's writing. I read pretty much all of the Pern books when I was growing up, and the Dragon Song trilogy is one of my favorite sets of books ever, so I read that one pretty frequently. And I wasn't familiar with this one, but it's just a short little science fiction book that's kind of more, I don't know that YA existed at the time she was writing, but a little more YA, meant for a younger audience, kind of like the Dragon Singer, Dragon Song, Dragon Drum series. And it's about a young man who is becoming the ruler of his country, and his advisor dies, and his advisor's cat is left behind, and so this cat, it just kind of has been there with this young man as he kind of steps into the role of government, and it's a cute story. So the advisor kind of transferred some of his powers into the cat, and so the cat is there to help this young prince become, ruler and so forth. So cute, short, I don't know, probably not the most groundbreaking book ever, but I enjoyed reading it. Then I went on a little bit of a romance novel kick again, and I'm not off it yet. We're into July, and I've already read 2 romance novels, and it's July 3rd today. So, I read pretty much all of these on my phone using, the Libby app, using the library. One was The Hating Game, which is the book that was kind of recommended as a Grumpy Sunshine novel that I couldn't get, and I ended up listening or reading something else a couple months ago. Now I can't remember what I read, but anyway. Um, so I finally got this hold on this book, and it's the story of two people who work together, and they're kind of like enemies. They have this very combative relationship, but that combative relationship turns into kind of a romance over time. So it was cute. I guess I kind of see the Grumpy Sunshine thing, but it kind of reminded me more of the like hate to love trope than the Grumpy Sunshine, although he was pretty grumpy and she's pretty sunshiny. So, and I particularly liked, the best thing about it is they worked at a book publishing house. And I figure anybody who writes romance novels should just always write them in the book publishing industry or something, because, like, of course we're reading books. We would like the book publishing thing. So, anyway, that was The Hating Game, which I enjoyed. And then I also read the Crazy Rich Asians series. So Crazy Rich Asians, China Rich Girlfriend, and Rich People Problems, I believe are the names of them, by Kevin Kwan. And I really enjoyed these. I was surprised how much I did when the movie for Crazy Rich Asians came out. I don't know, whenever it came out a couple years ago. It just didn't look anything like what I would be interested in. I had heard of the book, but, you know, I'm not much of a romance book reader, so it wasn't really that surprising that I wasn't into it. But my husband and I have been watching a lot of, like, late night TV show stuff on YouTube, not on, like, actual TV. We don't do stuff like that. That would be normal. But on The Daily Show, I believe it's Ronnie Chen, maybe? Can't remember his name. He, apparently, we watched some sort of interview he had with somebody, and he was in Crazy Rich Asians, and they showed a little clip, and it looked really funny, and so I was like, okay, I have to read that book now. And I did really enjoy it, and one of these days I'm actually going to sit down and watch the movie, but it hasn't happened yet. So I enjoyed the first book so much that I read all three in quick succession. So it's just this kind of crazy family that there's a lot of different branches of, so there's always a different person that you kind of are going from person to person, and it's sometimes hard to keep track of who's related to who, how, but they just have insane amounts of money, and then, you know, in comes this American girl of Chinese descent, but she's definitely very American, with her boyfriend, and he doesn't tell her about his extremely rich, crazy family, and so they try to drive them apart and so forth. So there's all sorts of chaos and pandemonium that occurs in trying to deal with his family and her not fitting in. So I also read a couple of Debbie Macomber books. I read A Walk Along the Beach and Cottage by the Sea, and as usual, I read them in the wrong order, because I came across A Walk Along the Beach. I was just looking for a book. It looked cute, and so the story in that one came after the story in Cottage by the Sea. So I went back and read Cottage by the Sea. This one's not really like a series, I don't think. I'm a little confused by the whole thing. But the two different stories, just like the things in Cottage by the Sea happen before the things in A Walk Along the Beach. So it's not like you have to read one before the other, but I have this tendency to read like a middle book in these types of books where it's not like series but maybe companion novels, and then I tend to end up reading them out of order pretty much all the time. So that's what I did here as well, and those were good. They were both a little bit of tearjerkers. I think A Walk Along the Beach was a little bit worse of the like making me sob in my chair uncontrollably, but I'm pretty sure I cried during both of those because there's some pretty major tragedies that happen in both. Yeah, A Walk Along the Beach I think was the one that was worse for me, but that doesn't mean it would be worse for everybody. So if you need a good cry and a little like somewhat sappy romance novel, those are some options for you. And moving on into a little bit more classic, I read To Love and Be Wise by Josephine Tey. I've been kind of reading through Josephine Tey's Inspector Grant series, and this was maybe book 5. I don't know. It's the one before Daughter of Time, which is my favorite book, one of my favorite books of all time, and what got me started on my whole Josephine Tey kick. But To Love and Be Wise was interesting. So there's a disappearance in it, and so the inspector's having a heck of a time figuring out what happened. And all signs point to like that this guy just slipped into a river and drowned, and they can't find the body because this river is known for not being easy to get bodies back out of. But something in Inspector Grant tells him that's not it, and so he does finally figure it out. But it's an interesting one. I enjoyed that one quite a bit. Kind of a slow starter, though. A lot of the Inspector Grant books, you're like, okay, when's the thing going to happen? And it takes a while. And then for more American literature stuff that I'm reading, because I'm making my kids read them, these are both books that I read in high school that I listen to audiobooks now. The first was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I hated this book with a passion in high school, and I don't hate it, but I don't like it now. So it went from, I called it The Inadequate Gatsby for forever. And now it's kind of like the meh Gatsby. So I kind of get why it's such a famous novel, but I still don't like it. I'm never going to be a Gatsby fan. So we'll see. We may try the movie sometime and see the more recent movie, not the older one, and see whether that catches my attention anymore. But still not a big fan. And then the other one is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. Yay, I got the author right. By Zora Neale Hurston. And this book is about a black woman and her experiences in life. Her grandmother who raised her had been a slave, and so she gets married off relatively young, and then she's widowed, and then she runs off with somebody else and gets married again. But just her whole story of finding who she is in all of this, and it's just it's a very, can I say very a few more times? It's a book I would really recommend. It's got some rough stuff to read in it, but I think it's very worth it to kind of get a sense of the character and the time that this is all taking place, and the place, all of that kind of coming together, and the life that this woman is having as she goes through from being young to being married to running off with a younger man and so forth, and then coming back home. So it kind of starts with her coming back home and all the women gossiping about her and sending her friend to see what had happened. And so the rest of the book is kind of her telling her friend what had happened and getting like the background leading up to when she left with this younger man. So anyway, it's a hard one not to spoil things in if you get too deep into it, but Their Eyes Were Watching God, very good, highly recommend. And then the last one I read was rough. It was The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni. So this was part of the Read Your Way to Heaven plan for year 3. It was the last book, and I had a Kindle edition, and it was just like never ending. So I was trying to explain what this book was to my husband because I was reading it, and he's like, "Oh, is that one of your romance novels?" I was like, "No." I mean, sort of, but no. So I was like, I don't even know how to explain this novel. So I got onto Goodreads, and it was like the premier plague book, and I was like, what? So, like, there was barely any talk of the plague, or zero talk of the plague, just some mysterious deaths happening in the streets, but, like, this is, like, 1600s Italy, so, like, whatever. Didn't start till, like, chapter 31 of this book, so somehow this is, like, this great book about plagues, but the first 30 chapters literally are not about the plague. They're about this couple who was supposed to get married, but they didn't get married because this guy paid off or threatened the priest that was supposed to marry them, and then chaos ensued, and they ended up here and there and all over, and she got kidnapped, and I don't get it. Like, if any book should be abridged, it is this book, and particularly if it's, like, supposed to be this great book about plagues. I guess Brett said that Pope Francis said something about it recently, and, like, it's required reading in most Italian schools, and I feel very, very sorry for the Italian students who have to read this, because it was just, it's not that it was bad, it was just so frustratingly, like, you'd get a little bit of the story, and then it'd be like, now we have to go back 50 years and tell you about Italian politics. I'm like, I don't care about Italian politics in the 1600s. I'm sure it's great. Like, I'm sure all the information is very good and it's historical fiction. It was written later, but I believe there was much research that went into it, but I just didn't care. I was just like, just somebody abridge this book and get to the point. Because I did not know until I looked at Goodreads when I was on chapter 30 of the freaking book that it's well known for its treatment of the plague. Now, to be fair, one chapter that focused on the plague was amazing. Like, it really kind of got the sense of the plague and how people reacted, and people didn't want to believe it was the plague, and they thought people were poisoning them, and they kept pointing fingers at each other, and people kept dying, and, you know, it felt kind of real, because it kind of felt like 2020 in a lot of ways. But, like, so there's literally one chapter, so just take that chapter, put it in an anthology, and get rid of the whole love story between the two people. It got old fast. So I am glad to be done with that, and that means I am now officially done with year 3 of Read Your Way to Heaven, which I had hoped to be done with back in December. I started this book back in March, and it took me till the end of June to finish it. So I do not really recommend The Betrothed, but if you do want to read, I believe it's chapter 31, that would be the chapter worth reading. Read about the plague, skip the annoying couple and they're trying to get married thing, because, yeah, I just didn't care by the end. I sort of cared for the first 2 chapters, and then we went back in Italian history, and then everybody went everywhere, and I can't. This is one I will never read again. So that is all of the books I have to talk about. It was a lot. I'm sorry if this got a little long. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like and subscribe if you so feel like it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.